This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey Hotcakes, welcome to Hot Take, the podcast where we examine the climate crisis and all the ways that we're talking and not talking about it. I'm Mariana East-Hegler.
And I'm Amy Westervelt. This episode, we're going to talk about the dangerous drop in climate coverage and how that interacts with how we talk about race and COVID.
Because if you're not talking about climate, then you're not really talking about those other issues in full either. And we have a fantastic guest to join us for this conversation, Brian Kahn.
Brian is the managing editor at Earther, which is part of Gizmodo. He's also, we just learned, a former park ranger.
Right? Shocked the shit out of me, too.
I was like, wow, I had no idea.
No clue. Also a former bartender, which is a thing in climate circles I'm figuring out.
Yeah.
Like you too, right?
Yeah. I spent some time bartending.
Some of the other things that we dig into with Brian are the studies that came out recently about the pervasiveness of both siderism in climate coverage and the need for more emotional storytelling, and how defunding the fossil fuel industry is defunding the police.
That's right. Which is a story that broke in the mainstream press last week, but built out of a feature we had in the Hot Take newsletter a few weeks ago.
Yep. So if you're not subscribing, what is wrong with you?
That's right. Get your shit together. We're breaking shit. We're breaking news. All kinds of things.
We're breaking news. Climate change is breaking records. How about that?
It's true. It's true. Sad. Yeah.
Speaking of which, it's time to talk about climate. Welcome, Brian Kahn, managing editor at Earther. We're so happy to have you with us.
I'm very happy to be here.
Yay. Okay, Brian, we want to hear a little bit about your origin story. How did you get into journalism and specifically into climate journalism?
So I did it the opposite way most people get into journalism, which is I actually worked in communications and then decided to get into journalism because I didn't enjoy the fact that communications is like a sort of cushier, calm job, and decided to go do much more.
When you say communications, what do you mean?
So I was working with up at Columbia at a research institution called the International Research Institute for Climate and Society, and was basically doing like a bunch of reporting on projects they were working on, and that other parts of NOAA, so the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, were doing as well, that were sort of tied in with similar programs they were working on. So it was sort of doing reporting on that stuff and helping run a website and Twitter. This was like way back when Twitter was like not really a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of this like novel, like, oh, cool, I get to like tweet as like an institution kind of thing. It wasn't quite the impact. It wasn't quite the way that I wanted my career to be going. And so I segued somehow magically into journalism at Climate Central, which is a research and journalism nonprofit.
That's cool. I love those guys.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it kind of set me on my path. And the thing that like really... the climate stuff, like I come to it from an academic background. I studied climate science and policy at Columbia, and I got into that because I was like a park ranger, and I was like, damn, like I love the mountains, and I'm a big hippie park ranger guy, and what's going to happen to these things with climate change? And so that was my sort of in to start asking questions, and that's how I ended up doing this thing.
That's awesome. Where were you a park ranger?
I was a park ranger at Crater Lake National Park in Oregon, and then
Beautiful. Yeah, wow.
So beautiful, so different. And it's funny because I was like, like this whole like get a master's thing, like it's a 1-year deal. I'll go to New York and then move back to the woods. And it's been a little bit longer than a year. It's been over a decade, unfortunately.
Is Oregon as white as they say it is?
It's quite white.
It's pretty,
yes.
It's pretty white bread.
Yes, it is.
I've never been there before, but like, I've heard a lot about the militias. Like once you're outside of Portland, it's just like fun city.
Yeah, it gets real weird real quick.
Yeah.
Which, slice of life. I'm working at a national park on federal public lands in the middle of a bunch of anti-government, sort of folks living around. Very interesting dynamics when you go to town sometimes.
I bet. If you could change one thing about the way we talk about climate in the mainstream discourse, what would it be?
So, it's funny. I would like to answer this question. I will answer this question, in fact, with the preface that, I've been trying to think about a story on this, and so maybe I'm just scooping myself by saying this, but I'm really tired of the idea of climate as a left versus right issue, and I think that it's one of those things where when we talk about Joe Biden's moving left by adopting the 2035 goal for 100% clean energy or clean electricity, that's not moving left. That's just moving towards science. That's doing something in line with what is actually needed. And so, the both sidesism thing is sort of falling somewhat by the wayside nowadays in most quarters. But, at the end of the day, there's still this degree of we want to frame it as a left versus right thing instead of a, Fantasyland versus science thing. And, that's something that I think I would love to see work a little bit different, to be realistic about what is actually needed to address the change, to address the climate and to create the change we need to not burn up into a fiery crisp.
Yeah, totally. Okay, are there any interesting emerging themes you've noticed in the ways that the media kind of talks about climate change? What's your hot take, Brian? What is your hottest take right now on climate coverage?
Was that a pun? Was that a?
That was a pun.
I didn't know we were still in the pun lightning round here.
It's always the pun, the pun phase around here.
Yeah, Amy is my prisoner, basically.
Wow, Amy, you live in the Punderdome. I'm sorry.
No, I threatened her that if she didn't say it, I would be very angry.
Yeah.
Wow, you two have a very good working relationship. Glad to hear that.
That's great. Yeah. Also, answer the question, Brian.
Oh, sorry, I'm stalling. No, I'm not stalling. So, I would say that the one thing that I've noticed, and again, I'm kind of lucky to work in a newsroom that, is a diverse newsroom, but it's that there's this, we're sort of starting to confront some of the more whiteness of climate. And I know that's something that you all have talked about quite a bit, but certainly my background was a very white way into this, right? Where I was I love nature and what's going to happen to it. But I think that it's really important to acknowledge that, a lot of other people are not coming from that point. And certainly my views have evolved quite a bit since that was my in, but it was not the only thing. It didn't just stop there.
Right.
And so, what I see is that, it's not to say that everything is perfect or it's a big kumbaya thing, but that, outlets are starting to grapple with these ideas of, it's not just the sea ice that's melting. It's this idea that, we need to tell stories about people that don't have air conditioning in India or in public housing, or even talk about the impact of that sea ice loss on indigenous communities. We're seeing these stories kind of start to come up more and more. And I think that, some of that also stems from the reckoning that's happening in newsrooms right now about how we've traditionally told stories in the wake of, the George Floyd protests and the reckoning that sort of hit newsrooms, basically concurrently with that, about, just how we deal with issues of race. And so I think that is in some ways, it might be forcing some editors that were once skeptical about talking about these, justice issues and climate stuff to actually confront them and take them seriously, whether it's because of the fact that there's a decree from on high or whether it's because they're finally waking up to it.
Yeah.
But either way, I think that's something that I want to see more of. And, I feel like Earther, we've been trying to, that's kind of our founding sort of mission. And it's nice to see other places catching up.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I want to come back to that because I both agree and disagree. But the main thing I took from your answer is that you listen to the show.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Anyone that doesn't, geez, what are they doing with their time?
Exactly. I know that you've been quarantined for the same amount of time as everybody else, and your lovely wife Cynthia has gotten into the sourdough game. So I imagine that you've gotten really familiar with the idea of bread.
Yes.
What's the most sophisticated kind of bread, Brian?
I got nothing. I'm really bad at guessing jokes, so.
The upper crust.
Oh my God. hard.
Yeah. What did the banker want from the baker? This is a little dirty.
It's not more dough.
That would be good, though. That would be really good. I'm going to give it to you. But the actual answer is to pump her nickels.
Wow. Honestly, that's better. I like that.
One of the things we really wanted to have you on to talk about is this dangerous drop in climate coverage. We've been railing about it on the show and also in our newsletter that the numbers are not just like, it doesn't just seem like you're hearing about climate change less. You definitely are. Like there's been a precipitous drop in climate change. It's like if we're going to talk about cancel culture, climate change got canceled. It's wild how less you're hearing about it from last year versus this year when it like absolutely didn't get better. And almost every climate story that I read lately is framed with like this preamble about how all our attention is now either understandably or rightly focused on the pandemic or racial injustice. And I'm sorry, but I disagree. I think that's like a false choice. It's a false dichotomy. Right. I don't believe that one has to suffer for the sake of the other. And I think the press needs to get better at covering climate as it intersects with other crises because it's always going to do that. There's never going to be a new crisis that climate doesn't intersect with. And I don't believe that we're going to stop having other crises. Like we've got authoritarians taking power all over the world, like willy-nilly. There's going to be crises. Yeah. And even though the coverage seems to have kicked back up in July, we're still waiting to see the numbers. Maybe by the time this episode has come out, the numbers will be out about what July looked like. So we'll deal with that then. But ever since we started in May, it's just been a steady and concerning drop. And it's even more concerning because all of these big newspapers like The Guardian and all of these other places like Washington Post have just like recently recommitted themselves to covering climate as a story of our time and waxed all poetic about it, but then they just dropped it as soon as there was another crisis out there. And I want to read from this piece that you published over at Earther by Jocelyn Timberly. This is what climate change looks like in an era of COVID-19. This is from March, by the way. The coronavirus pandemic seems likely to continue to threaten and disrupt lives across the world for at least several months to come. The global focus on the pandemic is completely understandable, but it is vital this does not mean the ongoing impacts of climate change are buried behind the headlines or ignored by governments. Too many people on the front lines of climate change, whether it's those in the Midwest or the remote villages of the Amazon, do not have the option to do this.
You know what strikes me about this too is that like I don't really get why it's hard for people to comprehend, because it's like, you know, your life is like this. You can be living in a place where there's a crazy storm happening that's worrisome, and the pandemic happening that's worrisome, and police violence that's worrisome. As a human being, like we're very used to experiencing these things all at once. So I don't understand why it's so hard for people to I don't really get why.
To hold those two ideas in their head. Exactly. Yeah. And that's why, you know, I really wanted to talk about this with Brian, because they're absolutely not doing that at Earther.
Exactly.
Earther has covered the protests. Earther has covered the COVID-19, but brought the climate lens to it. Like, it's not a choice.
From the start, you guys didn't, like, have to take a minute to figure that out. Like, you just started doing it, which is, you know, kudos to you. So, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I sometimes wonder, and well, thank you very much. That's too kind. And, you know, we really, I think for us, it was a chance to step back and think, like, often, you know, Earther is the climate site of Gizmodo, which is a tech site. And so a lot of the times, like, you know, just to provide a little bit of background, like, you know, we're considered like, you know, a blog from like the days back when like Gawker used to exist. This is one of the Gawker blogs originally. And that, I think blogging culture in some ways actually speaks to why we're very flexible. And that's still, you know, it's been years since Gizmodo and Gawker decoupled and all the drama that happened around that with the Hulk Hogan thing, which
That's right.
if your listeners want to like read about,
Yes.
Google Gawker, Hulk Hogan, and you'll have a
It's
whole days of
rabbit
reading.
hole.
But
Yeah, there's a documentary on it now too, right? I just watched one on Netflix. Yeah, it's good.
there you go.
Yeah.
So Cliff Notes that way. But I think that blogging ethos, like part of it is like how do you sort of talk about the thing that's in the news with the lens that you have? And that's one of the powers that Earther, I think, has, is we've always had that mandate from the beginning of like, well, what is the big news? Like, what is the climate angle? It's never been like, these, I guess, not to like knock the work that New York Times or Washington Post are doing, like, but those outlets, like their climate desks, I feel like have a pretty rigorous, like, plow ahead, like stay the course kind of thing. They're not as nimble as we can be. And so we have a little bit of a chance to take risks, find new angles, dig around, and respond to what's going on in the news. Like that's our mandate essentially. So, it's like pieces like the one that you just read from Jocelyn, who is a freelancer that has a newsletter actually that I would highly recommend everyone sort of subscribe to, as well as, the Great Hot Take newsletter. Mm-hmm. She sent me this story. She said, hey, like I put this in my newsletter. I could do some extra reporting. We could tie it to a U.S. audience a little more to get this to hit home. And, this is one of those first pieces where like, I feel like we really put the pieces together, with this like global, it was about this flood that was happening in the Amazon, and its ties with COVID-19. It was one of those first pieces I think that we did where we took like a specific news thing happening and we're like, what's the COVID angle to talk about this in addition to the climate angle? And so, it's part of our mandate. Like, it's just like, it's how we think.
Yeah. It also kind of seems like y'all and also Grist, I want to give some attention to, were prepared for this moment, this like racial reckoning.
Yeah.
Like y'all were prepared to do anti-racist coverage of climate because I feel like you'd already kind of been doing it and leaning in that direction. So is that like part of your content strategy as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely shout out to Grist for doing great coverage on this front as well. We look at them and I hope they also look at us and be like, oh, damn, Earther got that. Wish we had gotten that. Because we definitely have that happen at least like once or twice a week. We're like, oh, damn, Grist got that angle. We should have thought of that.
Yeah.
But, it really is baked into how I think, and certainly how the writers I work with, which are Yesenia Funes and Darna Noor, are our two writers doing the majority of writing for us. And it's how they think as well. And so, I would say that
two
like
women of color.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to the value of having diversity in your newsroom. Like if it was three white guys, like maybe we'd think that way, but the chances are that that's probably, I know that we're getting different stuff because we have the diversity of thought in our newsroom, and it's a huge asset. So, is it like this thing where we sit down and are like, oh, like what's the anti-racist angle for like X, Y, and Z, and how do we do that? Like, no, it's just kind of is baked into our approach as like, three humans that see injustices and that, view the world through differing lenses. So we really are able to bring our sort of expertise and our insights together in ways that I think they feel really exciting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think of two things. One is that you're running this shop with three dedicated people. You've got freelancers. I'm sure you've got access to the rest of Gizmodo, but it's like three people whose job this really is, which is why, to me, it's like incredibly inexcusable that gigantic outlets like The Guardian and Washington Post and New York Times can't stay on climate and can't introduce a climate lens to their COVID or racial justice reporting. It's ridiculous. Like, in particular, like, I think about places where they have climate reporters of color that they've like sent over to the COVID desk or the race desk, and they don't get to bring climate with them. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. The other thing is that, like, yes, you have like two women of color, like, working in your newsroom, but also it seems like they're able to be heard in a way that they often are not at these other big outlets. I mean, we had a whole show with Kendra Pierley about how like that is not always the case.
Hearing her experience at the New York Times, and just as a woman of color in a newsroom, like it was very, it was stark to me in a lot of ways, because I feel like that's something we explicitly try, like the issues she was describing are things we explicitly try not to do, at Earther and across the other sites that we're kind of a part of, not just Gizmodo, but, Jezebel, Lifehacker, Jalopnik are some of the other sites that are part of our network. And our upper management, they've said they've had this commitment to diversity, but I would say that, it's the middle management that's really like where the rubber hits the road, where we're seeing that push to really listen to the people in our newsroom that may be pushed aside in other places. And I'm not saying this to be like, we're like the best or that there aren't issues that we don't need to sort out, but it's clearly like it's something that, is really important to me as, just a person that cares about justice and wants to see the world be just for everyone. And it's something that I see across our newsroom as well, that, we're trying our best, and, obviously we're also learning as we go.
Yeah. And folks should be following, if you do the Twitter, you should be following Darna and Yesenia, and we'll definitely make sure to make that accessible for people.
Yes.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Why was the loaf of bread upset?
Something about rising, but I'm gonna.
Oh, no, you're close.
Oh, really? Oh, well.
Yeah.
That's about all I got. Something about rising.
His plans were always going awry. Why was a slice of bread upset with her husband?
Because bread shouldn't. I don't know.
He told her she was being too needy.
God. Oh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I was going to say because she had a yeast infection. Oh!
No!
Wow.
Why?
Next
You
level.
could have said that. Nothing stopped you from saying that.
Show me in. Help me out here.
Yeah. Yeah, so another thing that we wanted to talk about this week is the need to undo bad coverage. Like, this drop in coverage is not just bad because climate is getting worse, but also because there's decades of bad faith coverage that's been done. If you want like a deep dive into that, don't even go into an internet rabbit hole. Just go listen to Drilled, which is Amy's other podcast, where Amy is way more tame than she is with me.
It's my serious voice. I use my serious voice there. Yeah.
She does. And she doesn't drink whiskey on that one.
It's true. Coffee, yes. Whiskey, no. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the whiskey podcast. That's the coffee podcast.
Yeah.
We do coffee on this show too. We do it all.
It's true.
Sometimes we get a little crazy and we drink water. I know. But yeah, I wanted to start off by just framing us with this article that came out in Grist, speaking of, just this week. It's called The Surprising Reasons Why People Ignore the Facts About Climate Change by Kate Yoder. The underlying reason people dismiss climate science, it turns out, has more to do with political identity than logic. In fact, the more intelligent people are, the more polarized they tend to be on climate. When they're challenged, Democrats and Republicans alike simply use their smarts to justify their beliefs. Confirmation bias is a powerful thing. It's not just that Democrats and Republicans in Congress have different priorities when it comes to the climate crisis. They also use different styles of persuasion. A study published in the journal Environmental Politics earlier this month breaks down the differences along partisan lines. With the help of machine learning, Goober and her colleagues analyzed millions upon millions of words from congressional floor speeches from 1996 to 2015. They found that Democrats tend to make arguments about climate change backed up by facts and evidence, while Republicans tend to tell stories using imagery, emotional appeals, and humor to sway people to their sides. according to Goober, Republicans are communicating in ways that may ultimately be more effective. So, a couple of things about this is that, like, I've seen, like, some conversation about this on Twitter where nuance goes to die. But, you know, folks are sort of being like, well, does that mean that we shouldn't use facts?
No.
Folks, I'm going to hit you with something that, like, might really knock you off your socks. You can tell a story with facts.
Yes.
Whoa.
You can absolutely fucking do that.
I know.
You can tell a factually accurate story.
Yes. In fact, I actually just had this conversation with someone. There's a whole weird thing in the podcast world where, like, you have these two camps of like, you've got the NPR people who, like, started out at NPR and they have this background in, like, hardcore journalism. And then you have the podcast people who, like, only ever worked on podcasts, and they kind of, like, shit talk each other in this really...
Ooh, I want to get out on this.
Entertaining.
Is that a podcast?
No, it should be, but it's really funny because it's like both sides think, you know, like the NPR people think the podcast people are like bad journalists, and the podcast people think the NPR people are bad storytellers. That's basically like the gist of it. But I'm like, guys, you need both. And also, you know, I've had a couple of like narrative podcast people be like very nonchalant about fact checking. And I'm like, no, dude, like you're telling a nonfiction story. You have to make sure the facts are right, you know?
Right.
Yeah, I don't get this.
You can't just be like Alex Jonesing it out here.
Exactly. I don't get this whole thing of like that if you, that if you have a story, it can't be factual. Like that somehow facts make stories boring, and that like, you know, if you have a factual story that you can't use narrative to make it interesting. It's ridiculous. But this this kind of leads us into the whole both sidesism thing, which you referenced a little bit ago too, Brian. But there was a study out this week also that was quite disturbing, because I feel like there's been some research that has said, oh, like good news, like both sidesism is over. And I know that like we have seen less and less of it in newspapers for quite a while, especially the sort of standard, you know, but climate skeptics say blah, blah, blah. But this study that just came out this week found that, in fact, both sidesism is still very much happening. And
it's alive and well.
Alive and well.
Real quick though, what is both sidesism?
Oh, okay.
Either one of them.
Okay, so I mean, just the idea that you see in newspapers all the time, that there are two equal sides to every story, and that both those sides should be equally represented in any story about whether it's COVID or race or climate or, you know, whatever, that there's like, I mean, not just, I think it's important to like underscore that it's not just that there are two sides, but that those two sides are equal. That's the real problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's like the objectivity myth, which we talked about again in the first episode with Kendra.
Yeah. So this new analysis found no statistically significant change in coverage over a 30-year period when it comes to both sidesism, which is crazy to me. And it said the trend can't be explained by excessive coverage of anti-climate press releases in business-friendly newspapers like the Wall Street Journal. That like they're seeing this in even more liberal-leaning papers, you know, the New York Times, all of these kinds of outlets. Which I noticed just a couple weeks ago that there was a New York Times climate story that quoted Steve Malloy, and I was like, come on, guys, this guy is like
who's that?
He is like probably the best known like climate denial clown guy. Like he's the guy that like invented the term climate bedwetter.
What a claim to fame.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Right?
His other big one, his other like favorite insult to throw at climate people is to call us watermelons, by which he means we are green on the outside and red on the inside because we're all communists.
Bitch, I'm delicious.
He's, like, and like it's like there's no universe in which this guy should be considered a valid source for a legit newspaper.
Yeah.
But that's the thing with the climate deniers. Like they're you know, like they're good at talking to people.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that idea of storytelling,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Exactly.
they just tell a seductively
Yeah.
simple story. Like, don't worry about it. Everything's fine.
And
Like,
they're
Yes.
funny, right? Like
Yes.
Amy pointed out on Twitter that they use dad
They
jokes.
are the kings
So
of
you know
dad
what? There's a
jokes.
method to my madness.
True,
I know what I'm
true.
doing over
Yeah.
here.
No, they are.
Yeah.
They're like and like you said, Brian, like it's an appealing story. That's the thing too. Is like, I mean, this is why it becomes such a problem that the climate, like the folks that are kind of advocating for climate action are all about like, you know, facts and no emotion and whatever. And then the climate deniers have two things going for them. One, like they embrace storytelling and jokes and emotion and whatever else, but they're also selling a much more appealing story, which is like that it's not a problem and you don't have to worry about it.
Right.
Yeah.
That also, like, that makes me think about which one is older. Like, storytelling is extremely old. Like, sit around a fire, tell a story. It's much older than science and math.
That's true. Well, science and math are
and
just
so-
types of storytelling. I mean, they're like narratives.
Yeah, but, like, our idea of having numbers and, like, those numbers being being provable
Yeah.
and true and
Objective.
like actually like the idea of truth is older than the idea of facts. It's like from the time we evolved as human beings, we tell stories. It's how we built community.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense to me that the best storyteller is the person you want to listen to.
Right.
You know, like in terms of like when I think about like members of my own family, like the ones who were the funniest, who told the best stories, like those were my favorite uncles.
Right.
They were not reliable people. They could tell a story. You know what I mean? I mean, some of them were. Some of my uncles were. But like, you know, I have won arguments because I made the most impassioned argument. Not because I was wrong as hell.
Right.
Like once we were able, this is before you could Google on your phone, kids. I believed myself
Yes.
and I won.
Yes.
Yeah. But I got interested while you were talking, and I went and looked at the article about this study because I wanted to see when the study ended. It went from 1983 to 2013. That's the 30-year period
That's
in question.
interesting.
And what's interesting is that they're not like, oh, we actually got better at this, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Like we didn't get better as of 2013, which is actually quite recent.
Yeah, that's and see, like previous studies had sort of said that it, you know, it had declined beginning in like, you know, the early to mid 2000s and whatnot. So the fact that this study is saying no, again, I feel like it's this objectivity thing where like it's very easy for people to accuse journalists of being biased and get them to overcorrect in their favor. It happens all the time.
I mean, I think about that a lot with like the Green New Deal opposition and like,
Yeah.
you know, when they did the whole like, let's eat hamburgers. I mean, it fits the perfect mold, right? It's
Yeah.
jokey. It's kind of like tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
It tells a little funny story. Like, and it's just like, you know, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, aren't they going to ban hamburgers? And what are the both sides of this? And it's just
Yes.
like, oh,
All of a
God.
sudden
Like,
that becomes
stop.
the frame. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The person who I think gets at this the best is Naomi Oreskes, and she has this thing that she says all the time, which is like it's the same as if a sports reporter reported the score of a game and people were like tried to argue that wasn't the actual score. You know? It's like, yes.
And then the reporters report that like it's real.
Exactly. And then the reporters were like, oh, you're right. I guess
Yeah.
maybe it could have been 5-3 instead of 6-4.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
The Yankees said they won. The Red Sox said
Yes,
they won.
exactly.
They're both saying things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's,
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I also just want to point out that like this whole storytelling is more persuasive. Me and Amy have been saying that for a while. Like I hate to say I told you so, but we did. And I just
Yes.
want to,
We've been saying
you know,
that.
just a
We've been
little bit
saying
of a
that.
victory lap.
Yeah.
Take that victory lap.
We stay woke. Just saying. So reading these studies was like very validating, actually. Both of them made me feel like, oh, now I have science to back up what I say when like, you know, ridiculous people are like, that's just your hunch. I'm like, well, my hunch is working, girl. thing we wanted to talk about is hurricane and wildfire season and extreme heat. And like, we're just not talking about these things.
Yeah.
And it's weird.
Yeah.
In the beginning of the pandemic, our first thought was like, oh shit, it's about to be a hurricane and wildfire season. What if this is still going on when that happens? And the thing is, like, now it is going on during the pandemic, but you wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
So look at the coverage, and that's why that intersectional means more than just race.
Right.
Intersection literally just means an intersection. So you can have COVID climate intersectionality, which is absolutely what we have, but we're just acting like we don't.
Yeah.
So there was Cyclone Amphan, which is like this giant storm in India and Bangladesh recently. And now there's also like a huge flood going on in Bangladesh. All of that is happening on top of COVID already. Right. There was a tropical storm in New York City just like a couple of weeks ago, and your girl didn't know it. I was like, oh, that's a lot of rain. That's interesting. My window's banging. That's a lot of wind. That's weird. And then I saw somebody tweet, like, how is there a tropical storm going through New York City and nobody's talking about it? And I was like, in the middle of eating like a handful of chocolate chips, like, oh that's what's happening outside my window. And it's like, wait, but word, how are we not talking about this? And Brian, you've been writing about the cyclones that are happening now. So, yeah, fill us in, because ain't nobody talking about it.
Oh, it never ends. I mean, as we speak now, there is a cyclone that's, in the Atlantic that's rushing. It left I think it was 300,000, 400,000 people in Puerto Rico without power. Went over the Bahamas that were hit by Dorian last year. It's coming up through Florida now. By the time this podcast is probably out, like, it will have passed through the New York area. It's this Atlantic hurricane season is just been like super weird and super fast. And I feel like, it's not to say that it's on pace to be one of the most active, if not the most active hurricane season in the Atlantic ever recorded. And that is just absolutely wild. And frankly, it's terrifying. Like, that is a humongous story that, should be dissected on the regular, especially because these storms just haven't let up.
Right. What are we on now? Like J?
We're on I. We're about to get to J. I think we're about to get to J.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Katrina anniversary is coming up at the end of the month.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we will likely be well past K by then.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the season if memory serves correctly, which I think it does. That's, 2005 was the busiest hurricane season on record. We made it into the Greek alphabet because we ran out of letters named for storms.
Oh, shit. I did not know that.
Yeah. So that's something that is, potentially on the horizon for us. It's not to say that, like, we're going to get a Katrina type of storm, although, we're projected to get a lot of more than normal major hurricanes. So it's possible. But it's terrifying.
I also want to point out that Hurricane Dorian took form on August 24th.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Hurricane Dorian was a D.
A lot of people have been saying, oh no, what happens when, like, you have, quarantine restrictions on top of evacuations? Like, I don't think there's been anything figured out on that front.
Definitely not.
We're seeing it in wildfires too. There's people evacuated right now. Thousands of people in California have been evacuated for wildfires, and, like, you're only hearing about it in, like, local California papers,
Yeah. I want to read from this piece that was in Media Matters about this lack of coverage, and in particular the way we talk about extreme weather on TV news. Because TV news, especially when something's like happening outside your window, that is how most people are getting their news. They're not like reading articles. They turn on cable news or local news or whatever. So the title is Corporate TV News Needs to Break Its Cycle of Shallow Coverage of Extreme Weather. It's by Allison Fisher and Evlando Cooper in Media Matters. Corporate TV news programs coverage of extreme weather events, climate-fueled wildfires, superstorms, record-breaking heat waves, and mega droughts has become as predictable as the events themselves. With few exceptions, they are reported as isolated meteorological phenomena whose magnitude and human impact are mostly defined by statistics and the usual parade of disaster imagery. It's a choice corporate TV news makes to report extreme weather events this way, and it's a harmful one. This choice has resulted in national coverage of extreme weather that largely disconnects these events from the climate crisis, allows systemic failures, the racial and economic inequalities exposed by these events to go unchallenged, casts communities that are often hit year after year by climate disasters as helpless victims, and lets those who have failed to mitigate impacts and injustices go unaccountable. Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to have to mention Michael Schellenberger here because
Tell us about that.
One of the main arguments that he's been making in his book and in his like various media appearances is that, you know, climate change is not making natural disasters worse. And then when people challenge him on that, he gets into this whole like gotcha semantic argument where he says, well, you're conflating natural disasters and extreme weather because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, defines natural disasters basically by, you know, the economic damage that they do and the lives lost. So by those metrics alone, you can say that natural disasters have not been getting worse, but that's because people have gotten somewhat better at preparing and dealing with them, which is like very good news, but it's like not sustainable. You know, it's like, yeah, but the extreme weather is continuing to get worse and it's continuing to happen in these sort of cascading ways. Anyway, I just think it's important for people to understand that there are definitely people out there who try to use these terms to kind of confuse the issue. And when we're talking about, you know, like I think this story says, you know, climate-fueled wildfires, it's not to say that it's only climate change that's causing a wildfire or that, you know, extreme weather is getting worse because of climate change. That is settled science. The end.
Yeah. I mean, you know, like shout out to like my former employer, Climate Central. Like I hear this, like the pain about like the national news and like failing to do this, like dot connecting that needs to be done. But, you know, like one of the things that Climate Central was doing when I was there and is still doing is connecting with local meteorologists to sort of give them like climate related graphics and, you know, data and things that they can do to like tie weather to climate and these local, you know, TV meteorology reports. And usually like those meteorologists are some of the only scientists that like, you know, people are getting to see on a daily basis. And they're generally trusted. I mean, everyone loves to bitch about the weather forecast, but at the end of the day, like people sort of like respect the meteorologists and the work they're doing. And that program, I mean, like the idea of getting those people as trusted messengers already in someone's home and having them share climate information has like, it's a really like simple thing, but it's kind of a radical concept. And they actually just published a study, I think a week or two ago, showing that, you know, it does make a difference. People care more about climate change. They understand it and they get concerned.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, like sometimes like, I mean, it's certainly for me, I don't own a TV, so it's really easy for me to be like, oh, like, you know, when I do watch TV, it's CNN and it sucks because it's not at the airport.
Yeah.
When I used to go to the airport,
debate.
right?
Yeah.
But like, it was bad. But like, it's like these local channels are like making some inroads at least. And that's not to say that like, therefore everyone's absolved and we can all go home. But it's like, there are these like ways in, and I wish that I could see that kind of stuff trickle up into the national level, particularly with corporate TV news.
Wasn't there a big project with the Weather Channel doing that too? I think it was Climate Central doing that too.
I was thinking that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the Weather Channel is pretty impressive in that regard.
Yeah.
You know, they're all in on it. And I also do, like, I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out a former student of mine who works for CBS National, and is their meteorologist on their online network, Jeff Biardelli. He's, you know, he was one of my students in the master's program I teach in on climate science and policy, the MA in climate and society, if you're serious and want to come do that master's. But, you know, he is somebody that is really made to like bring the climate discussion into the weather discussion and into the newsroom. Like he's brought in climate activists, like youth activists, to talk about their viewpoints and things like that. So I think, you know, it's not enough, but it's like there are a couple people trying to push the boulder, you know, up the hill, I guess. And hopefully we'll get it there if they keep pushing.
Another thing that has just fallen out of the news is like these major heat waves that we've been having. Like I believe the one in New York City feels like it just broke, like knock on wood. But it lasted way longer than I'm used to. And I love heat, not just because I'm a Southerner. I'm just weird.
It's very weird.
It is very weird, right? I don't have air conditioning. Like I love the heat, but I definitely notice when it's been 98 degrees for a solid 3-week block. Like that's weird.
Right.
So yeah, it's been wild, and it seems like it's just not being talked about. Like when it is being talked about, it's just as like, well, this is the temperature for the day. Nobody's connecting it to climate or COVID or anything else. And Media Matters again had another great article about that we'll link to in the show notes. And it's just like, and they're also not talking about how it's impacting Black and brown communities, because it is much worse. Those communities tend to be heat islands, which means that they don't have tree cover. They don't have access to like places that have air conditioning more likely. Brian and I both live in Harlem now because I moved. And if you walk around Harlem any given night, the nights, like people are out, like it's packed, but the daytime people are like hard to find because they're trying to find a cooling center or something.
Right.
And how does that work during COVID?
Right.
And no one's really talking about that. It's weird. And there's another piece I wanted to highlight in Inside Climate News about heat waves in Southern Africa.
Climate science has a blind spot when it comes to heat waves in Southern Africa. Centered in the equatorial tropics, Africa is the world's hottest continent, and millions of people there are facing a growing threat from deadly heat waves. But no one knows how many people have died or been seriously affected in other ways by extreme heat because the impacts have been poorly tracked. Coordinating reporting is lacking, and at the global level, research and tracking of the impacts of climate change are biased towards developed countries, scientists concluded in a new study. Heat waves are one of the most deadly impacts of human-caused global warming in terms of lives, Otto said. It would be really important to highlight that in Africa. She said the issue falls squarely into the realm of climate justice. One of the key obstacles to compiling useful heat wave data in Southern Africa is weak governance in some countries, which can be traced back to a colonial legacy that destroyed and disempowered local cultures.
Yeah. I mean, that's so disturbing that, like, we don't even know how bad it is in some places because they're not even bothering to collect the data. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so creepy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like if you look at a map of weather stations in the world, it's just like sub-Saharan Africa is basically just it's like a no service zone. There's like, a few stations here and there. There's just, that infrastructure doesn't even exist to collect the data in the first place, let alone look at what's going on in it, which is a really, telling thing.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
And another thing I've learned in working with the climate strikers in Africa is like nearly impossible to send them money through things like Cash App or Venmo or even Kickstarter. What's that other one that people use all the time? GoFundMe. It's almost impossible to send them funds through that. So we had to find different ways to do it, because I was talking to a lot of the strikers in Uganda who wanted to help their community weather COVID and the floods that they were dealing with. And it's criminal how underserved Africa is when it comes to this sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's like Africa's hot. It's always been hot. So what? They have a heat wave.
Right.
Okay, last one. I gotta make it good. Why did the Baker file a sexual harassment claim?
I'm not going to touch that one. I need to know.
People kept commenting on her hot bun.
That was good, actually. All right, that might have been the best. Way to save the best for last.
So we should also talk about fire. For one thing, the Amazon is on fire again.
Yeah. Well, it's not the Amazon. It's Brazilian wetlands, which is slightly different.
Feels close. Well, also Antarctica is on fire.
Yes.
So you know what?
I know.
There's some fire problems.
There's some fire problems everywhere. It is true.
There's fires in Argentina as well.
Yeah, it's true. 1.5 million acres of land are affected by this fire in Brazil right now. That's like, I can't like comprehend how large that is. It's like,
right.
Yeah.
Other area that's been having a lot of fires this year is Arizona, which is another one of these heat wave areas where people are like, yeah, whatever, it's hot in Arizona. I have a friend who lives in Phoenix who's like, oh my God, like, yes, it's like always crazy hot in Arizona in the summer. But like, this is, honestly, I was like, why do you live there?
Yeah, you know what this is sounding like to me, and I don't care if people think I'm making a false equivalence, but it sounds like the fireworks this year, where people are like, oh, there's always been fireworks. Not like this, bitch.
Yes.
Not like this.
Yes. Yes.
I've never had ringing headaches.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we did a story at Drilled about the fires in Arizona because I feel like every year when fire season starts, there's always at least a couple of stories out there about the imprisoned firefighters in California, which is horrific. I live in the West, and I didn't realize that it's like 5 different Western states do this, that it's like common practice for Western firefighting in general. And that in Arizona, this like killed me about this story. Imprisoned firefighters outnumber like non-imprisoned firefighters 2 to 1. 2 to 1.
Wow.
It's crazy. And they've told us on record that they're like, yeah, it saves us a bunch of money.
Yeah.
Respect the honesty. Wow.
Like, wow. Yeah, and the thing is, like,
that's wild.
In California, it's extra bad because there's no way to get a job, like firefighting afterwards, because it's like, you know, if you have any convictions, you can't get a job, you know, as a firefighter, period. In Arizona, there's not that blocker, but if you do get hired, there's one crew that they always point to as their example of like, see, we're rehabilitating inmates and we're giving them these skills to get a job later, blah, blah, blah. And the people in that crew make half what every other fire brigade makes. So it's like, yeah.
I mean, you know, when we saw this story, this was an example of a story where we saw this and Yesenia was like, damn it, I wish I wrote that story. This one drilled, it's really good. And so everyone should read it. And also Earther was very angry at you for like 2 minutes, Amy. So, but honestly,
I love the competition.
Yeah, no, you know, I mean, climate news, we've talked about this a little bit, like Amy and I, like it varies as well. Like it's not like competition can be healthy, but I think there's also a degree of like, this is a huge issue and we need everyone.
Oh,
like,
yeah,
all hands
totally.
on deck, right?
Totally.
Yeah. And there's no shortage of like
crazy
crappy
stories
stuff happening.
Yeah.
So we've been doing some reporting on the California stuff and are currently in the middle of working on a piece, which I guess I can't really say a ton about since it's not my piece and it's being worked on as we speak. But we've been trying to get some details on what's going on in California this year as far as, you know, the prison firefighting brigades, but also, you know, what are they doing to protect these folks from COVID?
Right.
And so far, information has not been super forthcoming. But we're trying to get it, and I think that the reason it's not is probably because the answer is that they're not really doing much to protect prison populations from COVID.
Right.
We've already seen that play out in other places, and it would not surprise me that California is doing the same, let alone with people that are actually tasked with saving everyone's lives if a fire does strike.
No, they're doing a bad job of protecting prisoners from COVID, but their way of dealing with that has been to suggest maybe we shouldn't, like, counties where there's a jail are like, can we just not include the prison numbers in our COVID count? Because, like, it makes the whole county look bad. I'm like, oh my God, no, you can't do that.
Also,
I have
like, maybe
a dumb question.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, like, also maybe just think, like, if that's the case, what are we doing wrong in the prisons? And should we maybe fix that?
Right.
That would be my response as a, you know, a concerned citizen.
Right.
But that's just, you know, my 2 cents.
Yeah.
So my dumb question is like, are there more prisoner firefighters because citizen firefighters are dying off, or people are less afraid or more afraid to do firefighting as a profession because fires are getting worse?
Maybe. I mean, that's something that I've been thinking about, like, oh, I want to look into this more. Because initially when Steve Horn, who wrote this story for us about the Arizona situation, when he started looking at it, he was going to look at California and Arizona, and what he really wanted to look at was budgets and how, like, basically whether these states that use imprisoned firefighters are closing the budgetary gap on, like, climate fire stuff. Like, okay, climate change is making fires worse. We're getting more fires every year, and they're bigger. We need more firefighters. Are these states just throwing more prisoners at that problem, or are they actually like hiring more people? and mostly what we've found is that they're totally just using prison labor to solve that problem, which is really fucking gross. And you know, it's this whole thing too, where like, at the same time that they're like, oh, we don't have enough money to do fire prevention and to hire firefighters, they're continuing to fund prisons more and more in these states too, which, you know, I don't know that it's necessarily they're like funding prisons for the sole purpose of getting more prison labor, but it sure doesn't hurt. You know, like,
right.
Yeah. Ugh. It's the most backwards priorities that you could possibly think of. I mean, just in terms of like where you put your money and, you know, how you take care of people, you know, your population, your citizens. Like, it's just, it is shocking to me. I guess I shouldn't say it's shocking. It's just like enraging.
Like, we're not hearing a lot about it, like, not only because of COVID and because of like all of these distractions, so to speak, in the media, but also East Coast media bias, which I know like will send Amy on a rant, and I'm just gonna let it go.
Get it out.
Yes. I mean, I think it's like, I think it's getting worse because you've had so many layoffs and furloughs, and then people can't travel. It's crazy to me that like there's still this thing of like only things that happen in DC and New York matter to the national news. You know? And yeah, it's like I don't know. I find it annoying because it's like, I'm sure that you will see a California prison labor firefighter story, because that's like scandalous, but you won't see national coverage of like all the other fires happening, or like I don't know. It's frustrating. And you actually, like, as someone who has pitched national outlets on West Coast stories, like, they are just not interested. If there's no way that it impacts people in DC or New York, forget it.
It also reminds me of like, I think it was last week when I heard there was a hurricane barreling toward Hawaii, and I texted you to be like, is this normal? And you were like, yeah, they happen there all the time. But I didn't know that.
Right, because why would you? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect example of like hurricane season in Hawaii is getting worse, and it's highly problematic because, you know, they're dealing with sea level rise. So the whole storm surge thing is a big problem when these hurricanes hit. And like, they can destroy an entire island. Like in the 90s, the whole island of Kauai was like leveled by a hurricane, you know? But yeah.
I mean, like, that's the thing. Like, that's one of those weird, quirky climate impacts that Hawaii is now, like, you know, becoming a more common place for hurricanes to approach. And it's just, it's like they've been very, lucky is not quite the right word, but I mean, like, they were lucky they were only kind of like sideswiped by this hurricane that just blew through last week.
Yeah.
But like even last year they had, or maybe it was 2018. Man, I can't keep all my hurricane years straight.
I know.
But, they had a big storm that didn't make landfall, but it still dropped 30 inches of rain.
Right.
Which, caused flash flooding, erosion, all these other issues on the Big Island.
Yeah. I was there when those flash floods happened, actually. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's one of these things, too, where I think, similar to Puerto Rico, too, when you're on an island, there's not a lot that you can do when that shit starts to happen.
Yeah.
So they've talked about, we should start coming up with a managed retreat plan, which is basically like, where can we move people that they will be safest when these natural disasters hit? But there's pretty limited options on that front, again, an island. There, I kept my East Coast media rant somewhat short.
That was very chilly of me. I'm impressed with your restraint. Was it for me? Is it because I'm on the East Coast? You just didn't want to totally tear into me? Or?
No, I feel like it's not, I don't think any journalists or outlets want it to be that way. It's kind of just the nature of media right now and the economics of media that people are, outlets are shutting down. The ones that exist are losing contributors, not adding them. So you're definitely going to just lose coverage in certain areas.
It's tough even with you mentioned the layoffs and travel restrictions, but even with budgets being cut, that's another route that is making it harder to report from other places. And for us, we have some visions for what we want to do with our Katrina coverage that would have been really nice to be in New Orleans for, to get a local contractor to do some video or interview or whatever it is.
Right.
And it just, you got to fight tooth and nail for that stuff now.
Right.
And on the one hand, it's better that I'd rather fight for budget than see someone laid off. But at the same time, it just makes the bubble shrink a little bit tighter to what you can and can't cover and how you cover it.
Yeah, totally. I know. I was talking to someone the other day who was saying how funny she thinks it is when people will she's a journalist, how when people will accuse her of being a quote unquote media elite. She's like, everyone I know in media has either lost their job in the last year or is making half as much as they ever have in their entire career. So I don't know where that's coming from.
Yeah, it's like the scientists. People say the scientists are making a ton of money.
Right.
I have yet to meet a scientist who's rolling.
Yeah,
in.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
So I also, as we talk about how we're not talking about these big events, I've got to wonder, one of the biggest fears I had when that tropical storm was running through New York City was, are we getting numb? Mm-hmm. It was sort of we started covering natural disasters in the United States in our own media as though, the same way that we often cover them in the Philippines, which is not okay when we cover it in the Philippines that way or in India that way, where it's look at this storm. It's a big one. Whoa, that looks hard. And then we immediately look away and don't cover it as a human interest story. And we're kind of starting to do that in the big media outlets with storms that are happening here. And that's super disturbing to me. Mm-hmm. And Brian, you've done a lot of work on this, on writing on whether or not we're getting numb. You had 2 essays in particular, one in May and one in July. And can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, it actually it stemmed from the first one. The one I wrote in May stemmed from a conversation that I had with my wife, who we have a lot of fun at our house talking about lots of really sad things. She works in climate as well, so we were discussing this idea that the Trump response to the coronavirus was essentially a chance to sort of, the whole point was to make people not care, to make people just sort of accept that this was the way it was going to be. And when you map that onto the climate crisis, it's clear that that's also the Republican plan, is to eventually get people to not care that the mounting toll of disaster is taking on, us as a country, us as individuals, and certainly the people that have the least among us. And so that really, well, the first 2 of those things really hit me in that piece I wrote in May. And then as we sort of moved into the George Floyd police violence and, racial violence protests, it sort of got me thinking wait a second, it's actually even worse than just they're trying to get us to be numb to this idea of death, it's like they're okay with the idea of death as long as it's not white people that are the ones dying. And the coronavirus disproportionately affects Black people, Hispanics, Native Americans in terms of, getting sick and dying and, obviously dealing with mounting medical bills as well. And so, yeah, that sort of inspired me to think like, oh God, this is actually even more fucked up than I first thought, which is sad because the first essay felt pretty fucked up to write.
You want to read us an excerpt from the July one?
Yeah, sure. I'll do that.
Okay.
So the first essay that I wrote was called Accepting Death is Not an Option. And then the second one that I put together was Trump's Racist Coronavirus Response Foreshadows Injustice to Come. This is a horrific approach to a public health crisis increasingly contained elsewhere by decision-making grounded in science and societies invested in each other. To address the climate crisis will require a similar science-based approach and asking society to protect the most vulnerable over a period of time that will far outlast the time it takes to stamp out the pandemic. That's why what's happening right now with the coronavirus is so disturbing. Republicans have spent years delaying action on the climate crisis and have no real plan. The response to the anti-police violence protests and coronavirus show they have no plan to actually addressing systemic racism. Mapping that deliberate inaction onto the climate crisis is a nightmare. When Republicans are unable to put off delay any further, the climate policies they implement are all but guaranteed to favor white Americans. The border wall is a racist approach to climate adaptation, keeping out of the U.S. people who have fled parts of Latin America destabilized in part by drought, in a misguided effort to protect the homeland. It's easy to envision a Republican plan to build seawalls that protect wealthy white neighborhoods while making floods worse in poor Black neighborhoods. Or perhaps Republicans' climate priorities and commitment to injustice would manifest itself in bigger investments in predominantly quote-unquote white activities like farming, rather than cleaning up the toxic legacy of the fossil fuel industry in places like Cancer Alley, or foreign aid for drought-stricken farmers in Honduras, India, or Ethiopia. This is, in some cases, already happening with the Trump administration propping up farmers due to the trade war with China while fast-tracking fossil fuel infrastructure. So, yeah, I mean, I try not to dwell too much on like the bad things that could be coming, but it's kind of hard not to look at that and think again, like when it comes back to, the both sidesism that we've sort of seen play out in the media for decades, or this idea that, Joe Biden is quote unquote moving left by embracing certain climate policies. He's moving in the direction of science and what we're seeing and justice. And the Republican response to what we've seen so far does not exactly instill confidence that they will do the same.
Right.
Yeah. And I ask, why do you want to stay away from the bad things they might do?
I mean, why would I personally?
Yeah, you try to stay away from how bad it can get. Why?
Well, I mean, personally, so let me walk that back a little bit. I do dwell on those things, and it is something that is a common source of conversation in my house. It is also why I'm very excited to take a vacation and check out for a few days, because it does really start to viscerally hurt. It makes it hard to stay motivated sometimes, to think this is what we're up against, and the narrative they have is seductively simple and 100% wrong. And how do you fight that? Fighting that is a grind, and it's really tiring. And I know that there are people fighting harder than I am, and that are certainly doing doing their part as well, right? Or even doing more than I am. But after a while, it does sort of start to grind you down. And I find that is really challenging more and more in this environment, in particular with coronavirus and everything else happening in the world.
Yeah. I feel like if we stay too far away from it, though, then we wind up in these positions where outlets feel like, oh, we can let that sit for a second because we got to deal with these other things. You know what I mean? Because it kind of neuter the urgency.
Yeah. I think I really 100% understand that. And I think that for me, it's, I think for anyone working in whatever field it is, I guess I'll speak to myself, but for working in this field, when I feel the burnout hitting, it makes it really hard to sort of grapple with these issues in a constructive way. Like when the pandemic kind of started, I would burn out on like a Friday morning. And then it sort of moved to Thursday. And now it's like Wednesday morning if I'm lucky. Like I'm already fried. And I think, it's important to recognize that like if I'm not going to be productive, if I'm not adding or like, if I'm not helping the cause in ways that I feel are productive, then like I also need to like take a step back and like clear my head and hit that reset button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't want to end up in climate sad boy territory. If I end up there, I'm like, oh, it's gone to a bad place. So I'm trying not to get there. I don't think I'm ever going to make it that far. So don't worry too much.
No, I feel like Cynthia would keep you like on your toes.
That's true. Yeah, I think her and my cat would conspire to keep me out of climate sad boy status.
Oh my goodness, good. That's hilarious. Our last little section here, we wanted to look at this big batch of defunding the police, and kind of how that's equivalent to defunding fossil fuels in the past week. So,
or the other way around, defunding the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah. So this is cool because we had a story maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago about how when Chevron started putting up black squares on its social media feeds, I was like, wait a second. Like, I've reported a lot in Richmond, California, home of the Chevron refinery. And I know for a fact that Chevron not only supports the police there, but directly funds the police. So I looked it up and was like, yep, they're still doing it. And yep, it's a lot of money. So we had a story in Hot Take, which was an exclusive for premium subscribers. Just going to plug that for a second. Subscribe. Yeah. And then actually a couple people that I kind of connect with regularly who do research were like, oh, this is really interesting. Do you think that like other oil companies are doing this in other refinery cities? I'm like, I'm sure they are. In fact, Mary and I really wanted to do like a big story on all of that, but it's just, time. And so a couple of folks started looking into it. And then I guess it was last week or maybe the week before, this report came out that showed that, yes, in fact, in pretty much every oil state and every oil kind of refinery town, oil companies are funding police either directly or through massive donations to police foundations. So again, it's like, you don't even have to look that hard to connect the dots on these things. It's like there's really a direct connection between these two sort of dominant power structures. And it was great to see, I think almost every major outlet had a story on it, and all the stories were somewhat different. Everyone had their own take on it. And it was cool to see. I feel like we've spent some time complaining about things not getting covered on this show. So shout out to all the folks who did a good job on this.
People are listening. Sure. That's what I think they heard. They're like, we can't get Amy and Mary mad.
That's true. So it's all down to Hot Take. That's right.
Yeah. I will say, of all the stories that came out about it, I feel like Arthur had the best headline. Big Oil loves police. The emoji. Yeah. I thought that was very cute.
Thanks. That was I wrote that one. I was like, I don't know if this is gonna fly or not. My editor was like, yeah, it works. She gave me the person that edited it gave me an alternate pitch, which was her alternate title suggestion was, Big Oil loves the police like your Blue Lives Matter uncle, which it was a pretty good alternate. But she was like, just go with the heart.
Yeah. Right. No, that actually would have been super problematic because not everybody has a Blue Lives Matter uncle because some of us are black.
True.
So you went with the right headline.
Pass the test.
Yeah. Good job. And they fund Jazz Festival in New Orleans.
They sure do.
Basically,
Shell
they're
does,
funding the Houston climate plan for crying out loud. Houston as a city came up with a climate plan and is funded by BP. They literally own these places. Yeah. They have legit taken the place of slavery. You had an episode on Drilled about this, actually.
Yeah, it's really crazy. It's really, really nuts. There's even newspapers in Texas where the environment reporter is paid for by an oil company too. It's like, it's outrageous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
So
Anyway, fuck those guys.
Thanks so much for joining us. Yes, fuck them. With a stick. But thank you so much for joining us, Brian. It's been great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
It's been an honor. This is like a dream come true to talk with the Hot Takers.
Oh, wow.
I did not pay him to say that, folks.
I said it all of my own volition, and I will say it again.
It's the booze.
It's been a dream come true. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you so much to Brian for joining us on the show today. You can and should follow him on Twitter. He's at BL Kahn, and that is BLKAHN. And you should keep up with his work over at Earther.
Definitely. They're doing such a great job over there.
Seriously.
Yeah, so good. Every day I feel like there's an Earther story that I make sure I have time to read. Right. You can also follow us on Twitter at Real Hot Take. I'm at Amy Westervelt, and Mary is at Mary Hegler.
Yep. And like we said earlier, you should subscribe to our newsletter. We're doing great stuff over there. Everything from movie reviews to original reporting to climate grief essays to previews of essays we're publishing elsewhere.
And bonus clips from this show. And general rants, because we have a lot of them.
We've got a lot of rants. We got a lot of shit pent up. If you've noticed we've gotten quieter on Twitter, it's because we've moved the rant to another vehicle.
That's true.
Yeah. We have a premium version with all those fun features for as little as $7 a month or $80 a year. Or if you really love us, you can sign up for a founding membership at $210.
But we totally understand that everyone can't do that right now, and we firmly believe that that should not keep you from keeping up with the most important story of our time. So we produce a free newsletter too that has a ton of good stuff in it, including a roundup of weekly coverage and a free feature from us and teasers for all the good stuff in the premium newsletter.
Also, we have merchandise now. We've got hats and shirts and mugs, and we're getting even more. And I am wearing my shirt right now, and let me tell you, this thing feels like butter. I'm
so
running
comfy,
around.
Right?
They're amazing. I'm running around with a shirt with a quote from Kate Marvel, and it's like really comforting. So I highly recommend it. We've got tanks, we've got muscle shirts, we've got t-shirts, we've got it all. We've even got baby shirts, which I am 1000% getting a baby shirt for my cat.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you've gotten your shirts or any other kind of merch, send us pictures. We love to see them. And yeah, check back on our website, hottakepod.com, for more designs and new stuff soon.
Yeah. All right, that's about it for this episode. Our next episode, we're doing something totally different. We're going to be talking about climate writing and food. Everybody likes food, right? We're going to be... I like food. Love food. Going to be talking with David Tamarkin, who is at Epicurious. If you've got questions about that general theme, please send us to hottakes@criticalfrequency.org.
And make sure to leave us a rating or review at iTunes. If you have a negative review, please send it to brian.kahn@earther.com. Or if you just feel like talking shit, may we recommend going to the BP and Shell podcast and leaving bad reviews there.
Yeah, those are all great options. Fantastic options. All right, we'll talk to y'all again soon.
Bye!